The moment I saw her sitting alone at that corner table, mascara streaking down her cheeks under the dim amber light of the restaurant, my heart stopped, because the last person I ever expected to see, broken and abandoned in public, was Margaret Lawson, the woman who once told me I would never be good enough for her son. It had been 3 years since Daniel and I ended things. 3 years since I walked away from the Lawson family and everything that came with them. And yet here I was, frozen in the doorway of Romano's, with my takeout order ticket crumpled in my hand, staring at the one person I thought I'd moved past, watching her dab her eyes with a cloth napkin, while an untouched glass of red wine sat before her like a monument to disappointment. My first instinct was to turn around, to pretend I hadn't seen her, to let karma play out its hand without my interference, because Margaret had made it crystal clear during that final Thanksgiving dinner that I was a distraction to her son's future. A girl from the wrong side of town with the wrong degree and the wrong pedigree. And when Daniel chose his family's expectations over our relationship, she had smiled at me with cold satisfaction as I gathered my things from their sprawling colonial home. But something in the slope of her shoulders, something in the way she kept glancing at the door, as if hoping someone would walk through it and prove her worth waiting for, made me take a step forward instead of back, and before my rational mind could stop me, I was walking across that restaurant floor, weaving between tables of laughing couples and chattering families, until I stood beside her table and said the words that would change both our lives. "Mrs. Lawson, is this seat taken?" She looked up at me with eyes so startled and vulnerable that for a moment I saw past the designer clothes and perfect hair to someone who was simply human, simply hurting. And after what felt like an eternity, she shook her head and whispered, "Cassie," like my name was a ghost from another lifetime. I sat down slowly, my heart hammering, and noticed the second place setting across from her, the menu still unopened, the chair tucked in as if no one had ever intended to occupy it. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice brittle, and I could see her trying to reconstruct the armor she usually wore, trying to become the formidable Margaret Lawson who sat on charity boards and hosted garden parties. But her hands trembled as she set down her napkin. "I came to pick up dinner," I said gently, "but it looks like you could use some company more than I need lukewarm pasta." Her lips pressed together and I watched her calculate whether to send me away or admit to the obvious. And finally, she let out a breath that seemed to carry years of exhaustion. "I was supposed to meet someone," she said, looking down at her wine glass. "A man from one of those dating services. My sister insisted I try. She said I needed to move on, that I'd been alone too long. And I actually believed that maybe, just maybe, someone might want to share a meal with a 62-year-old woman whose best years are behind her." The bitterness in her voice cut through the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest, because this wasn't the confident, cutting woman who had looked down on me from her position of social superiority. This was someone who had been stood up, discarded, made to feel invisible. "He didn't show?" I asked, though the answer was written all over the empty chair across from her. "He texted 15 minutes ago," she said, and I saw her hand move to her phone, then away, as if even touching it would confirm the rejection. "He said something came up. Very sorry. Perhaps another time." The usual polite lies people tell when they mean never. She finally looked at me directly, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before: shame, raw and unfiltered. "You must find this terribly satisfying," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Seeing me like this, after everything I said to you, after how I treated you." And there it was, the elephant in the room, the history between us that couldn't be ignored, and I could have agreed, could have let her sit in her guilt. But looking at her now, I realized that holding on to that anger had been exhausting me too. "I'm not here to gloat, Mrs. Lawson," I said, and I meant it. "I'm here because nobody deserves to sit alone in a restaurant crying. Not even someone who once made me cry." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she looked away quickly, as if afraid that acknowledging kindness would break her completely. "I was horrible to you," she said, "to the wall, to the universe, to anyone but me. I know I was. I convinced myself it was for Daniel's future, for the family name, for 1,000 reasons that seemed so important then, but really, I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked, leaning forward, genuinely curious now. She turned back to me, her carefully maintained composure crumbling piece by piece. "Afraid that if Daniel chose you, if he chose love over legacy, it would prove that everything I sacrificed in my own life had been for nothing," she said. And the words came out like a confession she'd been holding for decades. "I married William Lawson when I was 23 because my parents said he was a good match, because he had prospects and position, because love was something that happened in movies, not in real life. And for 40 years I played the role of the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect society woman. And then William died 2 years ago, and I realized I had spent my entire life living for everyone else's expectations, never my own." She laughed, a broken sound that held no joy. "And when I saw you and Daniel together, saw the way he looked at you like you were his whole world, it terrified me because it meant he might escape the cage I'd built around myself. And in my fear, I tore you apart. I whispered poison in his ear. I made him choose between love and duty, and he chose duty because that's what I taught him to do." The restaurant sounds faded into background noise as I absorbed her words, understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't known I was assembling. "Daniel's engaged now, did you know?" she continued, her voice hollow. "To Vanessa Cartwright. Lovely girl, perfect breeding, perfect connections, and he's perfectly miserable. I can see it in his eyes every Sunday dinner. But he won't admit it because he's doing what I taught him, living for appearances. And I'm so tired, Cassie. I'm so tired of pretending any of it matters." She covered her face with her hands, and I watched this woman who had seemed invincible reveal herself to be as lost and lonely as anyone I'd ever met. Without thinking, I reached across the table and took her hand, and she gripped it like a lifeline. This woman who had once been my enemy, now just another person struggling to find meaning in the rubble of her choices. "Mrs. Lawson," I said softly, "it's not too late. Not for you, not for Daniel, not for any of us to start choosing differently." She looked at me with something like hope flickering in her tired eyes. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you walk away and rebuild? When you left Daniel, left us, how did you find the courage to start over?" I thought about those dark months after the breakup. The nights I'd questioned everything, the slow, painful process of remembering who I was beneath who they'd expected me to be. I had to let go of who I thought I should be and get curious about who I actually was. I told her. I went back to school, finished my teaching degree, started working with kids who reminded me that impact matters more than image. And slowly I remembered that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's approval. She listened like I was offering water in a desert, and I realized that this moment, this unexpected encounter, was giving us both something we desperately needed: a chance to see each other as real people, rather than the roles we'd played in each other's pain. "Tell me about your life now," she said, and she seemed genuinely interested, so I did. I told her about my 4th grade classroom, about the mural project we'd just finished, about my small apartment with the fire escape garden, about the simplicity and fullness of a life built on my own terms. And she listened with an intensity that suggested she was trying to imagine what freedom might look like. Then I asked about her, really asked, not about the charity galas or social obligations, but about what she loved, what she'd dreamed about, what she'd do if no one was watching. And at first, she looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, but slowly, haltingly, she began to talk about the pottery class she'd taken once and loved, about the travel writing she used to read, about a secret desire to see the northern lights that she'd never mentioned to anyone because it seemed frivolous. We sat there for over an hour, two women from different generations, in different worlds, finding unexpected common ground in our shared humanity. And somewhere in that conversation the waiter came by, and I ordered us both the carbonara and more wine. And we ate and talked like old friends, like people who had permission to be messy and uncertain and real. As the evening deepened and the restaurant began to empty, Margaret Sheed insisted I call her. Margaret looked at me with clear eyes and said, "Thank you for sitting down. Thank you for seeing me when you had every right to walk away. You've given me something tonight I didn't know I needed." I smiled, feeling the last pieces of old resentment dissolve into something gentler. "We gave each other something," I said. "Forgiveness, maybe, or just a reminder that people are more complicated than the worst thing they've ever done." She nodded slowly, then said something that surprised me. "I'm going to talk to Daniel. Really talk to him. Tell him what I told you tonight. Give him permission to choose his own happiness, even if it means disappointing me. Because I don't want him to wake up at 62 wondering where his life went." My eyes stung with unexpected tears, because I knew how much courage that would take, how much it meant. "And I'm going to sign up for that pottery class," she added with a small, genuine smile, "and maybe book a trip to Iceland. Because if a dating app disaster can turn into the most honest conversation I've had in years, maybe there are other good things waiting if I'm brave enough to try." We paid the bill together, split it evenly despite her protests, and walked out into the cool night air where the city lights blurred the stars but couldn't quite hide them. At the curb, before we went our separate ways, Margaret hugged me, really hugged me, and whispered, "I'm sorry for what I took from you, and I'm grateful for what you gave back to me tonight." I held her for a moment. This woman who had been a villain in my story, now just another person trying to find her way home. "We both got a second chance tonight," I whispered back. "Let's not waste it." As I watched her cab pull away, I thought about how the unthinkable thing I'd done wasn't dramatic or grand. It was simply choosing compassion over bitterness, connection over contempt, and in doing so, I'd freed us both from a prison of old hurts. 3 months later, I received a package in the mail, a handmade ceramic bowl, beautiful in its imperfection, with a note that read, "First piece from my pottery class. Thought you should have it, since you helped me shape more than clay, Margaret. P.S. Daniel called off the engagement. Says he has some soul-searching to do." I told him I'm proud of him. I placed the bowl on my kitchen counter, where morning light would catch it. A daily reminder that the most unthinkable thing we can do is offer grace when the world expects grudges, and that sometimes the people who hurt us are just other wounded souls waiting for someone to see them, really see them, and say, "You're not alone." And it's not too late to choose differently.